He had a form of quiet leadership, which I think could be quite firm in moments of crisis, certainly in the middle of a battle or when he was dealing with the Whiskey Rebellion, but was always courteous, was always thoughtful and considerate, and allowed people to feel like they had been heard. And, we talk about that sometimes today, but he didn't have the jargon we use, but he understood that that was so important for his job.
Hi, this is Tony Williams, Senior Fellow at the Bill of Rights Institute, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Scholar Talks. For this episode, we're very honored to have scholar David Stewart here, who is going to discuss his brilliant new book, George Washington, The Political Rise of America's Founding Father. And the guiding question for this conversation is really going to be, how did George Washington demonstrate a certain political genius in helping to lead the creation of the American Republic? And one of the reasons why I just really love this book is that it really dials into something not a lot of scholars have talked about, really original in terms of Washington's just political genius and how that played out over the course of his life in terms of being in the House of Burgesses and the Continental Congress, a general, a president, the Constitutional Convention, really had to learn the arts of deliberation and how to lend his presence, but also when to be silent, when to speak, how to deal with a lot of different interests and how to navigate national politics as well as dealing with state and local politicians as well. Generals during the war. So he really showed a lot of political skills throughout his life, and it's all here in this remarkable new biography. So by way of introduction, David O. Stewart is a best-selling historian whose excellent books include The Summer of 1787, which I just have happened to have a copy. Also Madison's Gifts, 5 Partnerships That Built America. American Emperor,
Wow.
Aaron Burr, and Thomas Jefferson. And also, it's up there on the shelf somewhere, a book on Andrew Johnson, Impeached. So yes, David, I have the whole collection.
I admire your library.
Oh, well, thank you. And all yours. So he's won several awards, including the Washington Writing Award, the History Prize of the Society of the Cincinnati, and the William H. Prescott Award of the National Society of Colonial Names of America. David, thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Well, let's jump right in. My first question is on politics, the subject of your book. Washington is often seen, shall we say, as a demigod or a man of marble, kind of far removed from us. But we often forget, as you point out in the book, that he really had a lot of practical political experience and maybe even expertise as a soldier, as a statesman, as president. So can you maybe just generally, by way of introduction, explain his political rise and why it's significant?
Well, his rise was really fueled by a couple of things that I would highlight. One is his ambition. He wanted to be an important person and to make a contribution to his community, to his world. And then his relentless willingness to engage in self-criticism and self-improvement. He was the hardest working man of his generation. He exhausted people with how hard he was willing to work, and that included on working on himself. And he, as all of us try to do ultimately, he figured out how to emphasize his strengths and de-emphasize his weaknesses. That takes a certain amount of intelligence to figure out which is which. We can be wrong about those. So he was awfully good at that. And I found it fascinating that his early years, he wasn't that good at it. And he got better. And that was through experience. And that was through this kind of self-improvement that I've been talking about.
Great. Well, yeah. Let's dive right into that early period. And you describe Washington as a young man on the make, right, with certain ambitions, who could be at times, as you describe, a little brash, a little impatient. But he learned, as you said, self-improvement, moderation, a greater restraint, and as you describe in the book, is during his time as sort of a rising planter statesman in Virginia in the 1760s and 1770s. So can you explain a little bit more on how and why this growth occurred?
Yeah, he was as a very young man in his early 20s, the senior military figure in the colony of Virginia, and it was more responsibility and more power than he was ready to exercise well. And he did annoy and ultimately alienate the people superior to him. And when he leaves the service, he knows he messed it up. And what you see then for the next 16 years, which is a period often skipped over a bit in Washington learning, is he serves in the House of Burgesses, which is the colonial legislature. He serves on the county court, which has a judicial element, but also has a big administrative element. They, figure out where the roads go. They run the tobacco warehouses for the export business. A lot of practical stuff that, to be honest, Washington was really good at. And he also served on the parish vestry, which is the Anglican Church in Virginia had governing responsibilities. Those experiences taught him a collegiality, a consultative style, which he hadn't had. He'd been, as a younger man, he'd sort of gone with his gut. He'd pushed ahead when he should have thought about it. And he developed a pattern of always wanting to hear what smart people thought about what should happen. He would always make up his mind on his own. He didn't just do what he was told. But if he had the time, he would take it and get the smartest people he could find to tell him what they thought. And that's just what we should all do, actually. Some of this, I think, is he got older. We all try to get a little smarter and a little slower as we get older. But his dedication to fixing his problems is impressive. Just one quick thing also, he was not a very good speaker, and oratory was a big deal in those years. And he had to figure out a way around that, which he did, partly by hard work. He just outworked everybody. And by mastering the talents he had.
Okay, excellent. And he had a lot to master in terms of politics, commanding the Continental Army in the Republic. A lot of different interests involved: state, local, national politicians, as we said. What political challenges does he face during that Revolutionary War, and how does he meet them successfully?
Well, you're exactly right. He probably spends more time as commander-in-chief working on political issues than he does on military issues. There's a real problem with legitimacy when you are leading an insurrection. Who are you? And, why are you there? And he recognized that the legitimacy came from the consent of the people, the participation of the people in choosing Congress and choosing their state legislatures. So he always deferred to the authority of Congress, the governors, and the state legislatures. But that meant he had to get along with them, and he had to get them to do what he wanted them to do, which was not easy. And it was a hard time for everybody. War is unpleasant. There was great impoverishment and loss through the country. But he also had to manage these issues, and they were as simple as reorganizing his supply system, which broke down in a period that I study in the book. And he had to get Congress to participate in that. And he brought Congress in to be part of the effort. He had to resist a movement to replace him as commander-in-chief. It's called the Conway Cabal, but there were 3 senior generals who tried to move him out. And he fended them off very effectively. And then he'd had to get an army on the field that would win. And he did that as well. So getting the supplies together, getting soldiers who would not desert, which was a huge issue, all took great leadership and great political sense, and what was a real laboratory for him in how to lead.
Okay, fantastic. And at the end of this war, Washington obviously very dramatically surrenders his commission to Congress in 1783. And he really lays down that amazing precedent of civilian control of the military, and refuses to become, a Caesar or a Napoleon. And he returns to Mount Vernon, as he put it eloquently from the book of Micah, under his vine and fig tree, right? And yet he still stays really deeply involved in politics, as you point out. And so how does he become a leader of the nationalists? Why does he still stay involved in politics in the 1780s if he's supposedly retired?
Well, ironically, his resignation wins him the greatest political support of his life, because everybody figures, well, this guy's not power mad. We can trust him. He's willing to walk away from it. And frankly, that's what you want. Somebody who's there to serve and is happy to go home when the time is over. And he becomes, when he first leaves the army, he writes these letters. People are getting upset because the country really starts to fall apart. And he writes back, it's not so bad. We're like the country is like a young heir who's come into his fortune too early and, is going to squander some of it, but we'll come to our senses. And after 2 or 3 years, he decides, no, actually, we're not coming to our senses. And he begins to exercise leadership behind the scenes. He doesn't run for office or anything like that, but he is the visible symbol of the country at this point. It's hard for us to realize these are colonies who didn't have much to do with each other before the Revolution. We don't have a lot of institutions. Congress is kind of a diplomatic body. We've got representatives from each state, but it's not really a nation. And we don't even have money. They're just basic stuff. And Washington is the symbol of the country. And that is a tremendous power. He recognizes the power of it, and he uses that to lead in his quiet way towards remaking the government. We had a very weak government at the time, and he and many others became convinced that it would not survive, and a stronger government was needed, and that led to the Constitutional Convention.
Right, and that's the subject of my next question is what role does Washington play at the Constitutional Convention, and then importantly in the ratification debate that follows?
It's a fascinating exercise to me, because the convention goes on for 4 months. There are wonderful speeches made by the smartest people in the country, and Washington doesn't do any of that. He presides over the hearings. He sort of calls balls and strikes and calls on the next person and counts the votes. But everybody knows what he thinks. He does cast votes so they can see what he's voting for. And he has written letters over time. And anytime you got a letter from George Washington, you showed it to all your friends. And so people knew the things he cared about. And it was very basic. He cared that there be a national government that was supreme to the states. He thought state government was fine, but you needed a national government. He thought there had to be an executive branch. We didn't have an executive office, and things didn't get done. And the third thing was, and it's, again, very basic stuff, you have to have the power to tax, because the national government didn't have that. And once you got those, he wasn't going to worry about the details. The ratification fight was essential, and he wrote a few letters. He followed it closely. He made his commitment to the Constitution clear. And I very much doubt that if he had not been at the convention and if he had not backed the ratification of the Constitution, that we would have gotten a new government. He was the force. He wasn't noisy about it, but he had this unique position of being the man everyone trusted.
Right. Yeah. I think it was James Monroe and a few others who said his reputation and support of the document really carried it to ratification. So yeah, you're in good company there. And so he becomes the first president, of course, and it's a big topic, of course. But how does his acting as first president, how does that show his sort of mastery of politics here as the culmination of his public life?
Well, he understands the public role. He's very good at it, and his whole life he has understood that. He's tall, he's got great presence. He always has great clothes on. He made sure he looked great. And he made a point of visiting every state in the Union during his first couple of years in office so everybody could see him. But it was much more than that. He built a cabinet out of diverse people. It's become the subject of Broadway shows, the fights between Hamilton and Jefferson in the cabinet. They had very different views, and Washington wanted to hear both sides, and he wanted that inside his government. And it was a tremendous achievement to keep them both there as long as he did. He had specific challenges that were gigantic, dealing with the debt coming out of the war. It threatened to undermine everything in the economy. There was the Whiskey Rebellion, which was a tax revolt that went on for years, and then staying out of the war in Europe, which many Americans unwisely wanted to get into. What you see in each episode, and I try to trace in the book, is he has developed a fine sense of timing. So, especially say with the Jay Treaty, which was a treaty with Britain that was very controversial. And if he had brought it to a vote at the wrong time, it would have lost. And the money to enforce the treaty would have lost. But he always waited and waited and waited. And when he felt the time was right, he struck. And that's something, you don't get with box tops. That's something you learn over time. You learn how to read people and you learn how to read the moment. And he, by this time, he knows how to do that.
Right, and perhaps reads the moment really well when he again surrenders power back to the Republic. He wanted to after one term, as you point out, finally is able to after two terms, and retires from the presidency, right? And lays down that principle of rotation in office, and that he's again not going to become a Caesar. So, how did Washington develop such fine-tuned political acumen to really set those right precedents for the Republic going forward, for the new nation?
To me, it's two things, and it sounds it has the potential to sound a little frivolous, but I don't mean it to. He cared tremendously what his contemporaries thought about him. There was a concept in this era in the 18th century of fame. And American leaders wanted fame, and we think of it as sort of, you got a lot of social media hits, or and that's not what they meant. What they meant was they were known because they had done important things and because they should be known. They were worthy of being known, and he cared a great deal about that. Now, he writes a wonderful letter when he first becomes president back to a friend in Virginia and says, "Tell me what people are saying about what I'm doing, and particularly tell me what they don't like. I need to know that. Maybe I need to explain myself better. Maybe I need to change what I'm doing, but I have to know that." And that was his commitment to care about that. The other thing is he did care about what he thought history would think of him. There is always in politics short-term and long-term thinking, and he was a long-term thinker. He saw neutrality as what the country should do. He was a soldier. He was willing to fight when he had to, but only when he had to. And those were important principles to him, and I think they've stood the test of time.
Right. Well, David, we have a few more minutes. Tell us a little bit maybe about why you wrote this book, and why is Washington still famous today, and why should we study him?
We should study him because of his, frankly, his leadership style. He defined the presidency for us in a way that that's what we expect in a president. It is not always or even that often what we get. But we expect someone to be dignified, to have character, to care about people. One of the qualities Washington had that we tend to lose is his ability, his emotional connection with people. One French officer wrote about how when Washington arrived in a town, it was as though everybody in town was his father or his brother. He just had a gift for talking to people simply, modestly, and hearing them. He was a great listener. And, that's a wonderful talent for a politician. John Adams referred to Washington's gift of silence. Now, that has two elements. One is you don't say stupid things, but the other is the other guy's talking and you learn what's on his mind. And that's a great talent. And Washington had that. He had a form of quiet leadership, which I think could be quite firm in moments of crisis, certainly in the middle of a battle or when he was dealing with the Whiskey Rebellion, but was always courteous, was always thoughtful and considerate, and allowed people to feel like they had been heard. And, we talk about that sometimes today, but he didn't have that, the jargon we use, but he understood that that was so important for his job. And I think it's a model that it behooves us to listen to.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to finish on. You mentioned so many civic virtues today, and I think there are lessons not only for young people watching, but really for all of us as we live in our democracy and need to practice civility as well as Washington did. Well, David Stewart, author of George Washington, The Political Rise of America's Founding Father. Thank you for joining us and enlightening us about George Washington as politician.
Thanks so much.
Right, and thank you to our viewers for joining us as well. If you like this video, please be sure to subscribe to our channel below and offer any comments. We produce new videos every Tuesday and Thursday exploring U.S. history and civics, including scholar talks like this one, primary source close reads, and homework help videos for students. And please come join our lively conversation on social media, including Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Again, thank you for joining us.